Here's the presentation outline, and I'm going to now hand the mic over to Dr. John Fisk, Director of the Wallace Center at Winrock International, for a brief welcome and introduction.
Hi everybody, it's good to be back with you today on the webinar, and thank you, Jeff. Looks like we've got a good number of folks listening in for this important topic. Before we move forward, I just wanted to say a bit about the Wallace Center at Winrock International. We've been a leading organization in this movement for a more sustainable and equitable food system for over 25 years. Currently, our focus is in support of entrepreneurs and communities as we build a 21st century food system that's healthier for people, the environment, and the economy. The Center serves the growing community of civic and business and philanthropic organizations involved in building a good food network across the United States, which, by the way, seems to be increasing daily, which is a terrific thing. In particular, we're focused on advancing regional and collaborative efforts around the country. Being a national organization, we work with regional efforts to get on the ground and develop some real-time solutions for moving more good food, healthy, green, fair, and affordable food, beyond direct marketing into larger scale wholesale channels where more consumers can access it and more growers and acres can benefit. So with that brief word about the Wallace Center, let me turn it back to Jeff, who will tell you just a bit about the NGFN, and then we'll get into our webinar today.
Well, thanks, John, and you'll see why the NGFN is such a good fit for the Wallace Center. In late 2008, we gathered thought leaders in sustainable food systems looking to build on the great success that farmers markets and other direct sales had. We saw this opportunity to scale up that good work into the mainstream food system to supply schools, hospitals, restaurants, and supermarkets with healthy, fair, affordable, and green food, what we call good food, as John mentioned. We have a particular emphasis in working with both rural and urban underserved communities. The Wallace Center, along with a high-power team of advisors, created the National Good Food Network to create solutions to scaling up good food. These advisors come from many different sectors, including nonprofit, for-profit, and academia, and they continue to advise us on how the NGFN can most effectively affect food system change. We created a national network of networks. We have 10 regional networks, teams of several organizations within a region. This makes up the National Good Food Network. The Wallace Center, as a national coordinator of the networks, what we call regional teams, takes the best of the best models and brings them forward to enable replication. We also provide a suite of technical assistance that the regions are able to tap into. This helps us to fulfill 3 critical goals. We work with the growers and the buyers, connect them, and using this value chain approach, we're able to increase grower viability, particularly small and medium-sized growers. Making these connections and deals adds economic vitality in the rural production areas as well as the urban inner-city depressed regions, getting more healthy food where it's needed the most. This allows us to reach children and families in their communities. We are a national connector. We make sure the right people talk to each other. We connect people to people. We collect and disseminate the best of the best models, knowledge, and market-based technical assistance. We connect regions to funding, both by ensuring they know about national funding opportunities, but also by working to generate new opportunities. One example of this is the HuFed Center, also housed at the Wallace Center. We just completed our letter of interest period for the year 2. We maintain a website and a database of people, organizations, and funders to connect people within and across regions. This is another great networking tool. We work with companies interested in buying more regional good food. For instance, our work with the Cisco Corporation yielded more regional food into hospitals, inner-city public schools, and other important outlets. We then document these models and allow others to learn and build upon our successes. We build community. We gather people from different sectors together to share ideas and find common business interests. We read all the email we get to contact at ngfn.org and take our responsibility to make the right connections very seriously. Let us know how we can work better to support you, and at the end of the webinar I'm going to tell you about an upcoming working convening that you may be interested in. Finally, we connect with other national networks such as the National Farm to School Network, the Community Food Security Coalition, and others to coordinate efforts, create synergy, accelerating this work, and reducing redundancy. Working with our advisory council, using you get what you measure, we established 3 goals for the National Good Food Network. Make sure there's a good supply of good food by working with growers and doing on-farm training, act as an information hub using tools such as this webinar, making sure those on the ground are connected to the best information that exists, and we're working to make sure that policymakers understand the economic, health, and social benefits to this work. This map shows that we truly are a national network spanning coast to coast. Here are the members of the NGFN Advisory Council, thought leaders in sustainable food systems work. I'm sure many of you will recognize these organizations. And our regional teams, boots on the ground, well-connected, and tight groups doing huge amount of great work. All of this information is also available at ngfn.org. You should feel free to contact us any time. The NGFN is headed up by Dr. John Fisk and Marty Grenzer. John is the director of the Wallace Center again, and that's where the NGFN is housed, and Marty is the manager of the NGFN. Thank you, John, and back to you.
Thanks, Jeff. That's good. Boy, it's amazing. Jeff's been doing this for a while now, and he's managed to learn to squeeze a lot of information in a very short period of time. So he whipped through that. So let me just say that these webinars are designed to be a technical assistance platform for the NGFN that offers expertise, innovation, and experience from around the country. So today, I'm really glad to have with us today Ms. Melissa Levy from Yellowwood Associates. Before I tell you about Melissa, let me just let you know that we're going to have a question and answer period after this, and I think Jeff indicated about typing your questions into the question box there, and then we'll mediate those towards the end. So Melissa has been an associate of Yellowwood Associates in Vermont since May of 2003. If you don't know Yellowwood, you should, because they've had a long and impressive record in the field of rural development across the country. For example, Yellowwood is the managing grantee of the Ford Foundation's Wealth Creation and Rural Communities Initiative, which is a national initiative. And as part of that work, Melissa currently coaches Alabama and Mississippi value chain exploration grantees and provides measurement and other technical assistance to Central Appalachian grantees. Melissa's other recent work includes evaluating a workforce development program in Wisconsin, conducting a study of the environmental sector in Vermont, and working with the Vermont Community Foundation and the United Way of Addison County to introduce You Get What You Measure modules to their grantees. She's also the co-author of a forthcoming paper called Measuring Community Wealth. So as you can see, we've got a highly qualified person to talk about this issue of strategic planning and being really focused and directed about knowing where you want to go and how you know you'll get there. And as Jeff mentioned, we at the NGFN used it very successfully and are very proud to be bringing this to you. So with that, let me turn it over to Melissa for the presentation.
Okay, great. Again, my name is Melissa Levy. I'm with Yellowwood Associates, and just to kind of go a little bit more into what we do, Yellowwood Associates is a small women-owned consulting firm. We're in Northwest Vermont. We specialize in rural community economic development, generally around natural resources. We work with a wide variety of, excuse me, of clients. Oops, sorry about that. We work with a wide variety of clients on a wide variety of projects you can see on our website, which I'll share with you a little later on. A great deal of our work over the past 25 years has been involved in agricultural enterprise development and food. So I'm here to talk to you about one approach to measurement called You Get What You Measure. There are a lot of different measurement processes and a lot of different strategic planning processes, but we feel like this one is different because it's a very participatory approach and incorporates the values and a diverse array of stakeholders throughout the process. It's a values-based, facilitated group process developed by us that integrates systems thinking into strategic planning and identifies key leverage indicators and aligns actions to achieve goals. It combines strategic planning, setting an action plan to reach your organization's goals, and selecting indicators and measures to measure progress toward that goal. As you can see, we've used it with a wide variety of clients, including federal, state, and local governments, nonprofits, foundations. We've used it with citizens groups, These are some selected ones. You can see we've used it with the National Good Food Network, which you've already heard, the Forest Service, and we've used it with quite a few groups around strategic planning specifically, and also evaluation. We've evaluated quite a few different programs and projects of different organizations using this approach. And I just want to start by talking about some measurement dilemmas that we've seen. And maybe some of you have seen these too, and we'll find out if you have. In our experience, there's 4 basic measurement dilemmas. People might not have any measures at all. They might do things that they've always done because they've always done them that way without really understanding why they do them that way or what the ultimate goal is. So that's one, just not having measures. Then there are misleading measures. Unemployment or employment, as an example, is unemployment doesn't count a lot of people who aren't really employed, like the underemployed. Poverty is another misleading measure, and there's plenty more. Then some people will use process measures only. They might count how many meetings they've held or the number of attendees at those meetings, but who cares about that? What's the larger goal of holding those meetings? Obviously, you're trying to transfer knowledge to people, and did they get that knowledge? And what is the end result you're looking for in having those meetings? That's the problem when you use only process measures. Then there's measurement without context, measuring without an idea of what's possible, without having an idea of what the possible outcomes could be. And our solution to that particular problem is framing measures, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And I'll talk to you a little bit about a really great example from the N.E. Casey Foundation that I will talk to you about. And I think, Jeff, we're ready for that first poll. So this is a poll. Oops.
Go ahead. Sorry.
This is a poll. I just thought we'd see, what people have experienced in their own experience with measures. So if you can choose any of these particular dilemmas that you've encountered in your own work, we can see what people have been dealing with in terms of measurement. So I guess people can just vote. Is that right, Jeff?
Yep.
Okay.
Choose whatever is
one or
most
more.
appropriate. Mm-hmm.
So if everybody could vote, that would be great.
Mm-hmm. Votes are still coming in.
Okay. Fantastic.
And do we just click the panel, or do we send it in the question box?
Just click right on your screen there. Click the panel.
Okay.
All right. So let's quick vote now. Okay. Let's close this now and see the results.
All right. So process measures only. I do see that quite a lot with different clients where they're really measuring kind of meetings and attendees and conferences. And so process measures and no measures at all. And great. Well, that's very interesting. So everybody seems like they've experienced something like that. So you all know where I'm coming from. And then I guess we were going to talk about strategic planning too, and I will go to the next slide. We can talk about strategic planning dilemmas. Now, these are also some dilemmas that we've seen with clients, and all with our, I think everybody has these problems. Even though we've been just going through our own strategic planning, and we've actually been using You Get What You Measure, and it's challenging. False assumptions, like the assumption that we all understand the goal to mean the same thing. I think we often go through strategic planning processes and we have a goal in mind, and actually people think that goal means different things and the words in that goal mean different things. So getting on the same page is an important piece of strategic planning, and that you'll see how You Get What You Measure gets beyond that. Arbitrary priorities. I'm sure you've all been through exercises where dots are used to vote on priorities on a wall. This is a really simplistic way of moving forward compared to understanding the system in which those priorities fit and understanding where the leverage in the system is. You Get What You Measure really takes a systems approach and understanding how all the different priorities interact with each other. This is a quote from Peter Senge that we like to use in these. Systems thinking is a discipline for seeing wholes. It's a framework for seeing interrelationships rather than things, for seeing patterns of change rather than static snapshots. And you get what you measure is really based on this idea of systems thinking and what is the system behind what you're trying to do. And just a couple more strategic planning dilemmas. We all make assumptions, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we all make assumptions and we don't talk about them. And this necessarily limits our sense of what's possible. This process really makes sure that those assumptions get out on the table and everyone understands what assumptions are being made. Lack of engagement and participatory learning. A lot of strategic planning processes believe that planning is for managers and don't necessarily involve all the potential stakeholders of a potential plan. This is another reason why You Get What You Measure is such a great process, and it really involves all stakeholders, including the people that are going to benefit from a particular goal, the people that are going to be affected by a potential goal, and the people who can impede progress toward that goal. So we really make sure that everybody is at the table and everybody has a voice. Seeing measurement as an afterthought. This happens all the time. A lot of projects and programs measure and evaluate after the fact without using it as a way to organize and focus the actual work of the project. This process really embeds measurement in the actual work. Oops. Again, I'm sorry. I think we're going to do another poll, the strategic plan about people's experience with strategic planning. I just wanted to get a handle on people's experiences. When was the last time you actually did a strategic planning process? So you can see the answers right there. And I think we can probably vote. Open the poll. So take a second. Tell us when was the last time your organization did strategic planning.
Okay, let's see the results.
Great. Let's see. Wow. Okay, you guys are doing pretty good then. In the past year, 44%, I'm impressed. And within the past 2 years. So good. Good job, everybody. That's great. And then I also just wanted to do one more. Another one was the next time you plan to do strategic planning. Now, obviously, if you guys have done them in the past year or two, maybe you aren't really planning on doing them. But let's see what people have to say about that too, and then we'll move forward.
Okay, get your last votes in. Okay, let's see.
All right, wow. Within the next year, amazing. Well, I think we have a very forward-thinking group. That's pretty exciting. I think that's great. So the vast majority of you are planning within the next year, so this is really pretty timely, it sounds like, for a lot of you. And so You Get What You Measure is really designed to address the dilemmas that we were just talking about, the strategic planning dilemmas and the measurement dilemmas, and to help diverse groups of individuals go deeper to discover shared values. So I just want to talk about, why do we measure? Oops. Okay, so why measure? Measurement, we learn from each other and about the world through measurement, and then we can refine our actions and make them more effective. It allows us to think more deeply and effectively. It creates unprecedented conversations with new people and at new levels that leads to new information and new patterns of information flow. One example I just want to talk about of this particular piece is a Maine community wanted information on the pollution status of their clam beds so they could have them reopened. The group members contacted the government agency that keeps the records and finally got through to the individual record keeper. she told them that even though they collect information on clam beds by town, her computer program could not then retrieve the information by town. And she also didn't have permission to release that information. Now, this is a while ago. I'm guessing that those computer problems wouldn't actually happen now. But once she understood the reason for the information request, which was the community wanted to expedite opening the clam beds by measuring pollution status more often, she actually was able to find a way to get them the information they needed. So by changing the flow of information in this particular example, the community then became empowered to actually act in a new way that resulted in the improved quality and use of their natural resources. What else? Measurement captures the results of risk and experimentation. This whole strategic planning is how we experiment on how we get to a particular goal. It supports constructive self-organizing behavior and can lead to new and unprecedented conversations, particularly with information gatekeepers, which we've already talked about. Okay, so I have an exercise for everybody, and it's called Everyday Measures. We usually do this in person, so this will be a little different. What I want you to do is just think for a minute or so about one thing that you count or measure as part of your everyday life, not work-related. And think about how you measure that particular thing and what kinds of decisions or actions you take based on those measurements. Now, I'm going to let you do that, and while you're doing that, you can type that into your questions
box, right, over there in the control panel.
And so while you're doing that, I'm going to give an example. And my example is I measure the amount of dirty laundry piling up in my house, and there's quite a lot sometimes. So the implicit goal behind that is that members of my family always have clean clothes to wear. The indicator is the amount of dirty laundry is increasing or decreasing. And the action, obviously, that I take as a result of this measurement is that if there is more dirty laundry than clean clothes, I do laundry. If not, then I take a break and worry about laundry another day. So, wow, you guys are great. And I know Jeff had an example, too, that I was dying to hear, so I'm going to
A few years ago, I had a hobby of bodybuilding, and with bodybuilding, there are many different things you can measure, weights and repetitions and sets on each exercise, but also an important part of bodybuilding is measuring how many calories you consume and how many you expend. And so I would, for measuring caloric input and output, I actually used a little iPhone application that I could sort of enter what it is that I ate. And before that, actually, there was a web app. So I would make decisions on meal planning using that tool. So there's a tool for assistance.
Great. That's a great example, and it looks like some other folks have some great examples too, which I don't think we're going to get to all of these, but I don't pull out a few. I see people measure their weight, and obviously the goal of that is to have a healthy weight. And so you measure using a scale, right, which is an instrument for measuring, and you make decisions probably about your diet and your exercise as a result of that measurement. Amount of gas in the car, that's a good one, also measured by instrumentation. You look at the gas gauge and also how many miles you've driven. I see lots of exercise. You guys are very healthy people. Grocery shopping, time practicing an instrument. I like that one. I used to play the violin, so I can totally appreciate that. What else? Keeping your house stocked with food. Again, the goal is making sure your family has enough to eat. So similar to my laundry example, you're using your powers of observation to see if you need to go get more food. Let's see, cat litter and cat food. We definitely got some folks with pets. Fantastic. Time with my children. I can definitely appreciate that one as well. What else? A lot of exercise and food and time with my children. Fantastic. So, number of text messages or phone minutes. So I'm going to just take one more example and kind of play it out for you, and then we'll move forward. But I think you guys did a great job. These are all really good examples. Oh, budgetary. This is another great one. How much I spend in specific categories measured against my budget on a monthly basis. Again, so the goal is making sure you don't spend more than you take in. And this is measured by presumably keeping track of your spending and your budget in some sort of program and comparing how much is spent with how much is brought in. So there are implicit goals to all of these measurements, and you can see you guys did a great job of talking about those. And there's also assumptions that we make through all of these things, and we'll get to assumptions later, but I just want you to kind of be thinking that you guys have made assumptions about the relationship between your ultimate goal and the thing you're measuring. And I also just want to kind of reinforce that you guys have all been measuring these things in different ways. So some of these are observational. You're actually looking to see how much laundry there is or how much food there is. There's research. So maybe if you were measuring the happiness of your family, you would sort of talk to them, right? You'd do interviews. It's like interviewing, key informant interviews to see how they're doing. There's instrumentation, like looking at a scale or looking at your gas gauge or looking at your Excel spreadsheet to see how your budget's going. So there are many different ways of measuring, and you guys are doing these things in your everyday life all the time. So this is an exercise we use to show people that measurement isn't really as scary as it seems, that you're already doing it, and there are a lot of different ways to do it and a lot of different methods for collecting that information. So thank you guys for all playing along. I want to move forward and show you what this process looks like. And before what I'm going to do is this is kind of a diagram of how this process works, and then I'm going to take you through this process using our work with the National Good Food Network so you can kind of see how it plays out. Now, this process starts in the middle where it says identifying goals. What do we really want? That's where we start. What do we really want as an organization? Then it moves to discovering indicators of progress toward those goals. Then identifying key leverage indicators, revealing assumptions, which we already talked about a little bit and we'll talk about more, creating measures, identifying baselines and framing measures, creating targets for those measures. Where do we actually want to be? And then designing the interventions or the actions that are going to get us to that goal. And then we use the results of measurement to actually reflect on where we are and figure out, do we need to change that goal? Have we gotten there? What do we need to change to actually keep getting towards our goal? There's continuous reflection built into this process to make sure that the goal, indicators, measures, and actions are always aligned. So you can see there are arrows between everything and the goal, because we will always want to make sure that everything is aligned with our ultimate goal. And as I mentioned before, goals are built on participants' values, and the three types of stakeholders that need to be involved are those whose cooperation is absolutely essential to reaching the goal, those who are in a position to prevent the organization from reaching the goal, and those who will be affected as the organization makes progress toward its goal, but whose cooperation is not essential. And everyone has a voice in this process in articulating their values, selecting themes, creating goals, and identifying indicators that would demonstrate real progress toward meeting the goal. Now, we use this process to help the National Good Food Network with its strategic planning. So for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to be using that process as an example, illustrating how it works as we go. And I just want to say, Yellowwood has been using this process over the past year or so. So it's been really interesting to be on the other side and being more of a participant instead of a facilitator. And it's definitely eye-opening as to what kind of work really goes into this process. And it is quite a bit of work, but you really get far pretty quickly. So, okay, we're going to start with a goal. A goal is a condition that you wish to achieve. A goal is not an action. It's not about doing or making, it's about being. Now, a lot of times organizations write their goals as an action. We want to do this, or we want to create jobs. But really, it's what you want to be. And the way we ask people to write these, the reason we ask people to write goals this way is so that there are any number of actions that can take you to that goal. When you write a goal as an action, you've pretty much limited yourself to that action. But when you write a goal as a condition that you wish to achieve, there are any really unlimited number of actions you can take to get there. Now, this requires a change in the way your organization or community looks, feels, and acts. For example, creating jobs is an activity. Being a community in which everyone who wants a job has one is a goal, for which creating jobs would be an activity. They're usually broadly stated, and a well-chosen goal should really reflect what you really want, not what you think someone else like a funder wants to hear. We write these in the present tense to create a forward motion. If you write a goal in the present tense and this condition doesn't yet exist, there's a tension. There's like kind of a creative tension where you really want that condition to exist, and you'll really want to make progress to get to it. Whereas if you write a goal in the future tense, it seems like something for the future that can be pushed off till later. So this is why we always talk to groups about writing these in the present tense. Typically, the process of getting the goals involves participants naming what they value about an organization, both externally, how the world sees that organization, and internally, how the staff and board and the organization itself operates. These values are then shared with everyone else at the table or in the group and explained by the person who wrote them. And often, when we do these processes in person, a lot of different participants will have similar values. So those values are then grouped into themes. And then once there are overarching themes, the participants in a process like this work together to write a goal for each theme, trying to incorporate all the values that are part of that theme. So this is similar to the process the National Good Food Network went through. And this is one of the goals that they came to. There is abundant good food, healthy, green, fair, and affordable to meet demand at the regional level. And that's the goal that I'm going to be taking you through today using this process. So an indicator. So once you have the goal, the next thing that happens is the group writes indicators of progress toward that goal. So it's something that must be changed or a condition that must be achieved in order to claim that progress is being made toward a goal. Since the goals are generally pretty broad, there are many possible indicators that can suggest progress toward the goal. To write indicators, each participant in the workshop is generally asked to write an indicator expressing something that must be changed or a condition that must be achieved to claim progress. The key thing is each participant's indicator is equally valid. Participants in a process share their indicators with other people, allowing others to ask questions about what that indicator means to the person who wrote it. So this is mostly so what happens is once the goals are created, then participants create indicators. They're shared among the group, and people are asked to ask questions about that indicator so they understand what it means. There's no talking about whether it's a good indicator or a bad indicator. All indicators are valid because they've come from someone in that group. And so there's no discussion of whether it's something that should be included or not included. They all get included, and sometimes by asking questions, different indicators get tweaked. But basically, they all get included, and they're all accepted as valid to get to the goal. Now, here are some selected indicators from the National Good Food Network session. I'm not going to read them all, but you can see they're pretty broad. There's some indicators about farmland and farmers, There's some about technical assistance, food companies, food safety, customers, infrastructure. There's a wide variety, and this is what happens because all of these indicators are ways of getting to the goal. Okay, now I'm going to show you this. This is the indicator analysis. Once indicators are developed by a group like the National Good Food Network, then they're reviewed, as I mentioned. People get a chance to ask questions. Then what we do is we put them in a circle like this. We number them. And the relationship between each indicator and every other indicator is discussed to see if there is a connection. For instance, if I was facilitating this, I might say, if indicator 1 happens, will that cause indicator 2 to happen? If there's a strong connection, we draw a solid line. If it's kind of a weak connection or people can't agree, then we draw a dotted line. And if there's no connection, we don't draw any line. So this is our way of determining where the different causal relationships are. So we do this for every single indicator with every other indicator, and it turns out to be this messy diagram that you see here. And what happens, what this eventually tells us, is that there are key leverage indicators and key results indicators. The key leverage indicators are the indicators that drive the entire system, and therefore are the indicators to focus on first. Those are the ones where the most arrows are coming out of them. So in this one, it looks like number 5. Oops. Well, 5 isn't. You can see that what was in number 5 has a lot of arrows coming out of it. So that's what you would be looking for, is one that has a lot of arrows going to other things, because it's influencing those other indicators. The key results indicators are the indicators that will be impacted by work on the other indicators and are closest to the ultimate goal. Those are the indicators that have the most arrows coming into them from other indicators. I'm trying to see on this one. It looks like for instance, number 9 has 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5 or 6 arrows coming into it. So this is a system. This indicator analysis, we do this indicator analysis after all the indicators have been developed, and we analyze them in a systems context. This is the system that we've created with this particular goal. And this is how we assume it works. And embedded in this diagram that you're looking at are assumptions. And what we ask groups to do is, once we have this analysis completed, we figure out what are the assumptions that are driving this particular system. And you'll see those in a minute when I show you. But so this was our goal. There is abundant, good food to meet demand at the regional level. The key leverage indicator for this particular process was stronger accountability among food companies and public institutions regarding procurement of regionally produced food. And you can see there are some assumptions embedded right there. So regionally produced foods are good foods. That's one assumption. And different organizations define this differently. Okay, so we were just talking about assumptions. An assumption is a hypothesis about some aspect of the way the world works, and we believe it to be true. A lot of times they can be difficult to recognize because they're so deeply embedded in the way we think about things. And a lot of us treat them as true, and that can be a barrier to innovation and creativity. For example, it was once assumed that an electrical signal could not travel more than 100 meters. If Marconi and others hadn't challenged that assumption, we wouldn't have wireless communications, among many other things that we have now. And we all make these assumptions in our work lives, in our personal lives. I have another exercise. We're not going to do it, but we do another exercise with participants where we actually talk about everyday assumptions, similar to how we talked about everyday measures. But I'll give you an example of one my own. I'm a pretty shy person, so I used to make an assumption that if someone didn't talk to me, they didn't want to know me. And as a result of that assumption, I missed out on meeting a lot of people, I think, so as a kid. So testing my assumption involved actually starting those conversations myself. which showed me that my assumption was wrong and led me to be a little more outgoing and develop some more friendships that I probably wouldn't have if I had kept that assumption. So assumptions really limit what's possible. And the great thing about this process, and such an important thing to get out into a process like this, is what those assumptions are and putting them on the table and making sure we actually name them, which doesn't happen often enough. And that way we can actually test those assumptions through this process. So again, these were the assumptions we were dealing with the National Good Food Network. Regionally produced food is good food. Different organizations define regionally produced food differently, and the behavior of buyers drives the system. If buyers were more accountable, adequate supply would be forthcoming. So those were the assumptions that came out of that particular indicator analysis that I just showed you. And here were the key results indicators. So again, these are the ones that are being influenced. These are the ones that should result if you focus on your leverage points. Increased participation among companies and institutions, increased procurement volume of good food, and collaboration between the National Good Food Network and Farm to School Network. These are some examples, and these are obviously not the things you want to focus on first. Okay, and now we get to measure. A measure then provides a way to actually count or value the status of an indicator. Now, once we do an indicator analysis like I showed you, we come out with the key leverage indicators and the key results indicators. Then it's time to figure out how to actually measure these indicators. How do we know how we're doing? So in order to count or value the status of an indicator, we measure in terms of number of, percent of, quality of, and to track a measure over time, you have to have a unit, which defines what you're actually counting. Are you counting people? Are you counting money? Are you counting pounds of food? And a baseline, which defines the value of the measure at some predetermined starting point. So the first step in developing a measure is actually defining your terms. And I think this doesn't happen often enough. The important thing that we do with groups when we want to start thinking about measurement is we make sure that everybody understands what each of the terms in the goal is, and also the key leverage indicators. So you can see here I've underlined some words that the National Good Food Network is then defined here as a group. You can read them yourself, but it's such an important thing to make sure everybody is on the same page. And you can't really measure something until you know exactly what it is you're measuring. So it sounds like a straightforward thing, and it is pretty straightforward, but it isn't always easy defining those terms. And you really, that discussion can often be a pretty involved one. And then the baseline, before I get into using the results, the baseline is really either the first time you measure, or if you have earlier data, whenever that measure was created. So we often, if people already have data, we try to get them to go as far back as they possibly have. And we also try to get people to measure positive things instead of negative things. And here, using the results of measurement, we have some basic rules, and these seem obvious, but a lot of groups don't follow them. If you don't know how you're going to use the information, don't collect it. So many groups collect so much information that just sits on their computer or on a shelf that doesn't actually get used, and it requires time to measure. So the important thing is really measuring things that you're actually going to use. And ways of using that can be to influence decision makers, to educate your stakeholders, and to improve your interventions and your actions for getting to your goal. Rule 2, collect information that's going to be the most relevant and useful in achieving your goal. The more closely your measures are tied to your interventions, the more useful they'll be. So again, going back to the diagram I showed you earlier of this process and how it works, this is something we often try to drill into people, is that we want to always be checking the alignment between our measures, our indicators, and our goal to make sure that they all make sense. And don't try to measure too much, and measure appropriately. And you don't need to measure everything to the nth degree if you're going to use it for for a pretty simple decision. We don't always need to be measuring to the exact, 1/100th of a point. That's another thing, and I have some good examples of that. Okay, then once you've developed, you figure out what you're measuring, it's time to figure out what you're actually going to do to get there. So you know kind of how the system works. You know what your key leverage point is and what your focus needs to be, how you're going to measure that. But then what are you actually going to do in order to achieve your goal? The action should be defined broadly enough to involve people in a variety of different tasks and provide opportunities for participants who don't normally work together to work together. Successful actions build energy and produce spin-offs. They broaden our perspective and suggest new relationships and possibility. So here are some, again, our goal, the National Good Food Network goal. There's abundant good food to meet demand at the regional level. And these are just a couple of the actions that I pulled out of this process. The Good Food Network leads the conversation with Cisco headquarters, which is already happening. Conduct conversations with retail companies currently purchasing good food to identify partners, and conduct those conversations with food service companies. So those are the actions, just a couple of the actions that the Good Food Network group came up with to get to the goal of there's abundant good food to meet demand at the regional level. Okay. So some questions need to be asked to measure progress on those actions. And we have to revisit our measures again. So in terms of having conversations with buyers, what has to be part of that conversation for it to actually count as progress toward the goal if we're measuring that? Does it involve just calling and introducing yourself? Probably not. It includes understanding the current practices for procurement of regionally produced food. It requires commitment. It requires talking about the benefits of regionally produced food. It might require learning about the barriers for those folks to purchasing regionally produced food. So those are just some of the questions that you have to ask, what actually counts when you're thinking about what you're going to measure. Is it just making the phone, is it leaving a voicemail message? No. So you have to be very clear, what does that mean? What counts? And what are the behavior changes that indicate progress? For this particular one, I would say increased commitment and a change in volume procured year to year. Those are the behavior changes that you're looking for for this particular example. And what's the baseline? The baseline is what are those relationships with suppliers now? What's the relationships in terms of how many suppliers you're dealing with, and what's the volume? So these are questions that you really have to ask before you figure out how you're going to measure. And think about how you're going to measure the number of buyer contacts or conversations that occur over a given period of time. How are you going to record and track them? How will you know which ones were successful and which not so much? So when you're doing measures, we start with framing measures, then a measure, then the unit, and then the baseline. Now the framing measure, that's kind of, I had discussed that earlier, and I actually want to give you a quick example because I thought this was a really good one. The Annie Casey Foundation does a really great job of framing measures, and I just want to kind of talk to you for 1 second about this. It's the Neighborhood Jobs Initiative, and the goal of that initiative is to increase adult employment rates in target neighborhoods to those of the surrounding region. So part of that project, they use framing measures to figure out what's going on the ground right now and to figure out what the possibilities are. So they use what they call closing the gap analysis to figure out what's actually possible. Sure, you can get a baseline, but what's the ultimate that you could actually achieve in this particular goal? So in their example, it makes a comparison between the number of target workers needed to equalize the employment rates between the neighborhood and the city or the surrounding region and those who are already employed. Now in this example, the framing measure could be the proportion of regionally produced food that they buy from regional sources. And the measure would be the number of conversations that of what we just discussed, the kinds of really deep conversations with buyers and food companies, and the volume of regionally produced food procured. The unit would be a conversation. It could be a buyer, it could be a seller, it could be volume. And then the baseline informs the buyers and sellers about opportunities. If one buyer is doing a good job, that can be used as a good example for others. So the baseline can actually create progress. I want to just talk about measuring as action, and I think that kind of leads into this. The act of actually measuring actually helps us learn what we need to know and make progress toward the goal. Measurement itself can create progress. Yellowwood Associates did a project a number of years ago with Clinton County, New York, which is right on the Canadian border, and they wanted to learn what the impact of Canada was on their economy. Now, they didn't know this, so the first time we did the study for them, that was the baseline. So they didn't know what the change had been from a previous year, but they actually were able to find out for the first time ever how much money was coming into their economy from Canada. Now, they then did that study every 2 years for several years. But by just doing that baseline study, they were able to have that knowledge and really be able to start planning and acting using that information. So that's what I mean when I talk about measuring as action. Just the act of measurement is a huge step and can create really a lot of new information, new actions, and a lot of new possibilities. So I just want to kind of recap the process that we just went through. So we developed goals, then we developed indicators, then we went through that messy diagram process, the indicator analysis to get to key leverage indicators. Then we created definitions of some of the terms in our key leverage indicators and in our goal. And then we decided what we were going to measure. And then, once we decide what we're going to measure, we decide what are the actions we're going to take to make that measure move. So once we take that baseline, and then if we want to remeasure, what do we need to do in between to make that measure actually move? And then we create a measurement plan. Now, it's really important to create a measurement plan because otherwise it very well may not happen. So the kinds of questions you want to ask in a measurement plan are, what kind of change in the measure will indicate progress toward the goal? And that's something we had discussed previously with the example for those conversations with the food buyers. Where are we going to get the information we need? How are we going to get the information we need? Can you get the information in a way that encourages behavioral change? Who is going to do it? I mean, these seem like simple questions, but if you don't lay it out how this measurement is going to happen, then it gets forgotten. So who's going to collect the information we need? What partners do we need to get that information? How much time will it take? And what will it cost to collect the information? Is there a cost, or is it something that doesn't cost anything? Because that's another thing you have to budget for. Who's going to analyze the information once you collect it so you know what it actually means? And how's it going to be used? Again, don't collect the information if you're not going to use it. So how is it going to be used? Who's going to use it? And when is it going to be used? If you want to be influencing policymakers, you need to know when is the appropriate time to give them the information and in what format they need it. The format might be very different for a policymaker than for a funder. A policymaker needs something very short and concise, whereas a funder probably wants gobs and gobs of, a funder might want gobs and gobs of information about what it is. So these are all questions that we encourage people to ask in that measurement plan and to make sure you understand who's doing all of those pieces of the measurement plan. Then the other thing that we do is once a group identifies a list of potential actions, we actually ask them to review what they're already doing in their work lives against the actions they've just come up with so that they're actually aligning their current work with the potential actions they may be taking as a result of doing this process with the goal. So again, the power of measurement. Measurement is a very powerful tool. It really allows us to identify and test our assumptions about the way the world works. It focuses our efforts, helps us align our resources, and very importantly, it helps us tell our stories to potential supporters. And that's a really important thing, especially for, showing progress to funders or to supporters or to donors or contributors. So I think that's about it. I just wanted to really thank Jeff and John and the National Good Food Network for giving us this opportunity to talk about You Get What You Measure and measurement. And yeah, and I'm happy to take any questions that people might have. I think we have, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah, we have a little bit of time. We do have a little bit of time for questions.
Great.
Thanks, Melissa. That was good. I think the way you presented it was easy to follow. And
oh, good.
some of the questions that came through said, this is really good. How can I get the slides? So that's always a good indicator.
Oh, yeah. Of course, yeah. And I have to say, this process is really an in-person process. And I was talking to John and Jeff about this, and it's challenging to convey in a webinar. It's a very interactive process. It's a group process, and we do it by webinar sometimes. We do it in modules. That works pretty well sometimes. But there's certainly the indicator analysis, which you saw with all that big diagram, is really something you have to do in person often.
Right, and that was my experience when we did it with NGFN, that I wouldn't say it's complicated, but it certainly is stepwise, and to have someone there like yourself to coach you through it was a big help.
Yeah, I think it's critical. So, and we can train people to do it too. So yeah, we can get into questions.
Right. So there's a couple of questions here, and then I'm sure some others will come in. Deborah's asking, what were the 3 groups who were most concerned about the goals? I think that refers to something specifically you said early on.
Oh, right. Yeah, the stakeholders. Yeah, we talked to, there are 3 groups of stakeholders that we really encourage people to include in a strategic planning process like this. And those are people and organizations whose cooperation is absolutely essential to actually reaching that goal. And then there's those who are in a position to actually prevent your organization from reaching the goal. Those might be competitors. Often they are competitors. And then there are those, what we call kind of beneficiaries, I guess, those who are going to be affected as you make progress toward your goal, but whose cooperation isn't really essential to actually getting to the goal. So, so I think that's what she's referring to.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good general outline. And I actually had that question myself. At what point and to whom do you engage? Because sometimes when you talk about community, it can be quite large, or if it's organization or company, it can also be quite small. And you've got to kind of find the right balance, I think.
It is. It's challenging, and these processes can really get big. We facilitated a process like this for a group in South Carolina that had a goal of creating, having more of their youth get baccalaureate degrees. And we had 80 people in the room, and it was quite exciting. It was a very exciting thing. So it's possible to do this with very large groups of people. And in that case, they had students, they had parents, they had faculty, they had local colleges and universities, local businesses. They really went very broad with who the stakeholders were for that particular process. So.
Okay, good to know. Here's another question, another specific one. Please explain why UI, capital UI, or poverty were cited as misleading measures.
Well, unemployment, I guess, is what I had mentioned. And unemployment often doesn't count the underemployed. And I think there are certainly a ton of people who would like to be working more, maybe full-time, who maybe are working part-time or temp. So the unemployment generally doesn't count those people. So I think that's what I meant by that being a misleading measure.
Okay.
Yeah, and poverty, poverty I think measure is generally is based on income, which is also not necessarily the whole picture in terms of poverty. There's certainly a lot of different factors that go into poverty that aren't all income based. So I think that's what I was trying to get across. So.
Okay. Another specific one, but kind of a thoughtful one. Tessa asks, how would you measure increase in commitment? So that kind of says, how do you take some of these more nebulous things and put them into metrics?
Right. That's a really good question. Increase in commitment. Well, I guess like if I was thinking about this in terms of like an organization, like I'm going to think about this in terms of, I'm going to just give an example. I'm on the Conservation Commission in my town, and if I were thinking of my commission and the people on it in terms of what their commitment is, that's a really good question. I mean, you can measure it in terms of, like we were saying, process measures, how many meetings do they attend, but really that's not a very powerful measure. You could, I think I'm going to have to think about that one a little more. So again, I mean, that's the easiest thing, the quickest and easiest thing I can think of, but does that really show commitment? I don't know.
And I think that seems to be kind of where the worlds meet in a sense, because you want to be able to measure things, but some of the things that we want to, sometimes it's hard to measure the meaningful things, and yet we still need to do it in order to move some things forward. And so, I once worked with
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say I once worked with a guy who he worked in kind of a corporate culture, and he had this kind of what he called, well, I won't say, but he basically called it the jerk factor. And he couldn't really measure it, but he'd get a sense and take kind of the barometer of how much of a jerk some of these people were acting like in his world. And if they were acting less jerky, he felt he was being successful in some of his work. So that was his effort at kind of something that was important to him, but wasn't really that tangible. And
right.
It worked for him.
I think you could also maybe interview people, like use kind of an interviewing approach and just really talk through what their commitment is, and what their plans are. That might be, there's some measurements that are really qualitative and not quantitative, and they mean more if they're qualitative. I mean, certainly, yes, you can. The quantitative measure is how many meetings does someone show up to and how much work are they doing, but what really comes out of that. So,
couple other questions. Cheryl and Johanna ask, what's the typical time frame for going through this process with a stakeholder group? And then the second question is, does it cost anything?
Well, I'll start with the time frame. Generally, let's see. I mean, I'd say planning for something, a session like this, and kind of the aftermath. Well, it really depends. For instance, going through a workshop, like kind of what I've laid out, that's probably a 1 or 2 day process of having a whole group of people in a room working together. So that's like probably at least 1 full day, if not potentially 2 full days. And then there's a lot of preparation, but that would be on Yellowwood's part, preparation for it. And it depends if it would be a strategic planning kind of thing too. When we've done strategic plans using this process, there's quite a bit of preparation before a workshop like this, and then obviously after a workshop like this, then developing a strategic plan from it. So, yeah, the time commitment for the actual workshop is a full day or 2, and then obviously depending what you want to do with it, then there's other time for follow-up and preparation and figuring out what different groups are looking for. But we tailor each and every workshop to the needs of whatever client we're working with, and there is a cost. We do presentations like this all over the place at conferences and on webinars, and can do those just to introduce the concept. But to actually go through this process as a group, yes, there is a cost, and that would be another thing that we can budget out for different groups depending on how many people we're presenting to and what they're looking for. And we are doing this in modules now, so you don't actually have to spend 2 full days doing it. You can do it in smaller segments.
That's good. Thank you. I think that's good. Another question here. If someone's asking about the examples, they were hard to see in the presentation because they were really just examples. But maybe the bigger question is if people wanted to see examples of the process, is there anything on the website, or can you email people things, past successes or something?
It sounds like maybe they're talking about the indicator analysis, which was a photograph. A lot of times we create diagrams of those in like a PowerPoint kind of program, and I can definitely share, I can probably share one of those with people if they'd be interested in seeing it more up close. The photograph is hard to understand without seeing what the actual indicators say. So yeah, I could definitely share one of those with folks.
All right, maybe we can get that posted on the website along with this particular session.
Yeah.
Okay,
definitely.
great. I'm just scanning the questions here. How often do you suggest an organization go through a strategic planning process like this? This is asked by Ginny.
That's a great question. I mean, that's a really good question. I think it actually depends on what your goal is and how long you think it might take. I think generally, from what I've seen, a lot of groups go through strategic planning processes every 5 years. If you go through it too often, then you can't really do the work, right? Because you're constantly in planning mode. But then if you don't do it enough, then you're kind of off in the ether and you're not really doing things efficiently and effectively and working toward your goal. So I think 5 years or less is probably a good amount of time. It looks like some of our participants on this webinar are doing it more often, and that's great. I think planning is a really necessary part of trying to get to goals, and making progress.
Good. Here's a question from Rebecca that I think kind of gets to the heart of what you're trying to communicate here. And she says, can you discuss how developing measures relates to developing strategic plans?
Okay, yeah. Well, the way we do strategic plans, and we do them using this process, is we go through a process like this, and you get to measures and then actions, and we talked about that. And so the actions basically create the backbone of your plan. This is what we're going to do over the next however many years, right? Some strategic plans are 2 years, some are 5 years. So this is our goal. This is what we think it's going to take to get to our goal. These are the actions. So the actions are really the plan. What we like to do is embed the measures in there so you have a way of figuring out if you're getting there. So we really like to embed the measurement and evaluation right into the strategic plan, and I think that's the power of this process, is that it's already there. So you don't actually have to figure out how to measure progress because it's part of your plan already. And I think that's our approach, and I think people really like it because it's all there. And then you don't have to hire an evaluator to figure out if you've gotten where you're going. You can see it because you're measuring all along.
Right.
That's why we do that.
So what I hear you saying, then, Melissa, is that it's not the activity you're after or the strategy; it's the outcome. And if you have a metric in place, you'll know if you're getting your outcome. And if you're not, you can adjust your strategy.
Exactly. You can adjust your actions, or maybe your goal has to be adjusted. I mean, if you're committed to those actions, then maybe the goal is different than you think it is. But yeah, I mean, assuming everything is aligned the right way, then yes, the outcomes should be apparent, and you should see progress as you go through your strategic plan. So, yes, that's exactly right, John. Thank you.
Okay. That's what I thought I heard you say.
Yes.
Let me see here. We got time for one more. Andrew's asking if there's an outline for this process that they can find somewhere. I think within the presentation, there's some simple flows and outlines. But is there something more we can get on the web, or should they just call you?
Yeah, they can get in touch with me. My email address is there, and you can also check out our website. Our website does have more information about the process and goes into some more detail and goes over some of the things that I've already talked about to you all. So yeah, but I'd be happy to answer any questions and provide more guidance on what it really takes to go through this process.
Okay. Well, I think we're gonna end it there. Thank you, Melissa. This was fabulous, and we had time for a lot of good questions.
Great. Thank you all.
Yep.
And very good questions.
Let me turn it back over to Jeff. I know he's got a few parting words for everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, John, and thanks, Melissa. That was a really interesting taste of you get what you measure. I feel like I've heard the word measure more times this hour than maybe ever before in my life. Webinars like this are the third Thursday of each month. The next webinar on February 17th will take you on a wild ride of small regional meat from pasture to plate. If you're more used to thinking about produce in local regional food, this webinar will knock your socks off. There's so many interesting complexities when dealing with meat, and our presenters from the Center for Agricultural Development and Entrepreneurship are extremely well-versed and dynamic. They'll focus on their work in the Northeast, but we believe their knowledge and innovations are applicable across the U.S. In addition to providing context for newcomers in the meat world, they will dive deep into small meat processing and the culture of beef production for our more savvy attendees. Don't miss it. To register for this webinar and all of our webinars, go to ngfn.org. Again, we also have a growing archive of all the NGFN webinars, recordings, slides, written questions and answers, and other resources, ngfn.org/webinars. Take some professional development time and watch one or two that you've missed. We've actually recently reorganized the webinars in a topical way. You might be interested in aggregation and distribution, for instance, farm to school, food safety, policy, value chains. Many of our webinars cover several of these topics, and they're appropriately cross-listed. So we hope this will help you find the webinar archives that will be most helpful in your work. The Wallace Center NGFN has begun a cooperative agreement with USDA Agricultural Marketing Service to understand and support food hubs or local regional aggregation facilities. As a first step, Wallace and a team of other organizations, including the Project for Public Spaces, is trying to identify all of the food hubs in existence or just getting started across the nation. If you are part of a food hub, let us know. Go to bit.ly or bit.ly/myfoodhub, where there are a short series of questions so we know who you are. If you also know someone else involved in a food system, in a food hub, please let them know about this questionnaire. There's also a link to this survey on the front page of the ngfn.org website. The Wallace Center and NGFN plays its role as convener next in Detroit. We're part of a team sponsoring a participant-driven, action-oriented conference centered around the development of 10 to 12 real-world projects or businesses, led by good food advocates like you from around the country. On the first day, conference participants will form into teams around these projects and around 3 to 5 general distribution issue areas, which will be selected in advance through an application process. Over the next 3 days, participants will work together in these teams to build actual businesses, solving existing business challenges, developing research projects, and identifying best practices to help tackle the challenge of local and regional food distribution logistics, infrastructure, and transportation. For more background on teams, visit makinggoodfoodwork.com. That's also where you can register. This is a really innovative and exciting conference. You may have never attended anything like it. Many of us believe that in order to have sustainable regional food systems, we must get more young people to be farmers. The University of Vermont has teamed up with the renowned Intervale Center to create a farmer apprenticeship program. The goal of this program is to create small farm business owners, teaching the Concepts and Practices of Diversified Agriculture Production. This program provides an intense supportive experience where participants leave with a deeper understanding of agriculture management and small-scale farm business within the local community and the entrepreneurial skills to start their own operation. Participants will be prepared to enter the world of small, organic, sustainable farming as farmers, activists, educators, and policymakers impacting our food system in a positive way. You can find the NGFN on YouTube, on Twitter, and on our website, ngfn.org. I'd like to encourage you to add your name, interests, your bio, and other information to our growing database of people, organization, and funders, increasing your ability to connect to people within your regions and nationally. This is a resource to find people in your region or across regions doing similar or complementary work. This is all part of the NGFN as acting as a connector. Look for the database link in the resources section of our site. And if you haven't already, sign up for our email updates. There's a link on the ngfn.org homepage, or you can let us know in the post-webinar survey, and we'll sign you up. Also, I wanted to let you know in the post-webinar survey, there is a question about getting contacted by Yellowwood if you're interested in their services. So, be sure to give us your information if you are interested and you get what you measure. The NGFN would just like to thank you for your time today. Let me encourage you to fill out that survey once again, and this concludes the webinar.